5 receiver look. Burrow steps up and will take a downfield shot and has Chase and he'll score.
Hurts throws off his back foot again. CD touchdown OU. CD another TD.
He pulled it. Unbelievable. South Carolina wins.
They're holding their breath in Champaign. They'll let you know.
And they did let us know in Champaign as the Fighting Illini knocked off the undefeated Wisconsin Badgers in what was the biggest upset of the season so far. I'm Chaz Messman alongside Jack Johnson and Tyler Culross. This is the playoff committee. And boys, we got another great weekend of college football coming up. We start things off with Ohio State, Wisconsin. Then we got a top 10 showdown in the SEC between LSU and Auburn. And then, of course, we got Michigan, Notre Dame under the lights at the Big House.
3 ranked matchups, 3 matchups that will decide the playoff, and 3 matchups that will really dictate how the seasons are going to go for the 6 teams. I mean, it's what we call eliminator games, Chaz. You know, if you win those games, you stay alive, your playoff hopes are still alive, especially for Notre Dame with already 1 loss. If they lose to Michigan, their chances are done. And they're probably looking at either a New Year's Six Bowl or if they fall even further, Pinstripe Bowl.
Jim Harbaugh has a job on the line, maybe?
Well, I'll put it this way. I mean, Jim Harbaugh, while the record has been tough for him over the years, especially against top 10 opponents and especially on the road, he actually has performed very well at home. He has not lost a home game since 2017 against Ohio State. And so for Harbaugh, he does a very good job defending his home territory, beat Wisconsin and beat Penn State last year at home, and of course, goes on the road and loses to them. And that's kind of the nature of the Michigan program. They do very well under the lights with the home crowd cheering them on, but anytime they get in some hostile environment, they tend to struggle.
Yeah, I definitely think that this season is the deciding factor for Harbaugh and his tenure with Michigan. You've seen his recent struggles in the past 2 years especially, and just his inability to beat biggest rival Ohio State. And I think their struggles this year, especially with the Army game, you saw that early on this season, and how they barely scraped out a win. I think going into this week and the coming weeks are definitely going to decide Harbaugh's tenure in Michigan.
All right, as always, before we get into the top 25 rankings, I want to hear guys' player of the week from the previous week. Was there anyone that really stood out to you, Jack?
Absolutely. I mean, I watched him absolutely torch the Michigan secondary, Chaz. That was KJ Hamler.
He had a big one.
He had a huge one. Let me just read off the stat line to you. 6 catches, 108 yards, 2 tutties. Unbelievable game for KJ Hamler. And one of those touchdown receptions absolutely broke Michigan's back in the second half, where it looked like they were going to create a historic comeback in Happy Valley. And KJ Hamler gets behind the defense, safety Josh Metellus from Michigan, and he beat him by about 20 yards, Chaz. He was as wide open as you can possibly be in Division I college football, and that was a touchdown that sealed the deal for Penn State. They needed that score. They were floundering in the second half, and Hamler, he's the spark plug for that offense. If they're going to beat Ohio State in Columbus later this year, it's going to have to involve a strong dosage of KJ Hamler.
Yeah, honestly, I guess you could kind of call it the players of the week for me. I had 2 guys, both Boston College running backs against NC State. A.J. Dillon, 34 carries, 223 yards, and 3 touchdowns. That puts him second in the nation for rushing yards. And then David Bailey, their second running back, 16 carries, 181 yards, and 2 touchdowns. They just absolutely tore it up against NC State in the win against NC State. And I'm kind of looking forward to see them play Clemson this week. Clemson has shown some weaknesses against the rush this year. So I think it should be an interesting dynamic to have the 2 running backs going off a hot week. And maybe they could cause an upset this week. So
A.J. Dillon, definitely one of the most underrated running backs in the country. You don't hear his name a lot when you talk about, the elite of the elite in terms of the running back position in college football. But for me, my player of the week, Shane Buechele. Texas transfer. He's now at SMU. Been absolutely killing it this season. Against Temple this week, he was 30 of 53 for 457 yards and 6 tutties.
Yeah.
He's been balling out in that air raid offense for Sonny Dykes. And this SMU team is absolutely legit. But now we're going to get into the top 25 rankings. At 25, we have Wake Forest. At 24, Iowa State. 23 are Arizona State Sun Devils. 22, Appalachian State. 21, Boise State. We start with Wake Forest. 6-1 this season in the ACC. Really have turned their program around. In recent years, we always thought of Wake Forest as being the bottom of the ACC. However, this year they've been competing. They got a couple big wins over a school like North Carolina, who, took Clemson all the way to the end. So this program is definitely on the rise.
Yeah, I think what's important to value about Wake Forest, Chaz, like you mentioned, they're the bottom feeder of the ACC historically. That's not the case this year. Wake Forest, they're proving that they're a tough out, and that's not something you could have said about the Demon Deacons for a while now. My comparison for Wake Forest has always been Vanderbilt. They're just Vanderbilt. They just happen to be there, and no one really pays much attention to them during football season, but they've made some noise, and something that's really impressed me about Wake Forest, their offense. They're able to get yards on the ground. They're cutting up about 4 to 5 yards a carry, and what impresses me about this Wake Forest team, in the ACC, where points are at a premium at times, if you're going to go out and you're going to upset teams that are ahead of you, you need to put points on the board, obviously, but Wake Forest, their path is... There's not a whole lot of resistance in front of them. This is about the weakest conference I can find in the Power 5, and this is the weakest the ACC's been in some time.
Yeah, it's basically Clemson and then everybody else. There's nobody else that's really a strong team in that conference.
You couldn't point at the other teams and say there's one team that's definitely better than the rest. I mean, some are worse than others, but any given week, if I rammed Virginia Tech and Miami together, they most likely go 5-5. I mean, the talent gap from Clemson, obviously they're at the top, but then from that on down, I mean, it's a bit of a mess right now in the ACC. Tyler, what do you think?
Yeah, like you guys said, I think the ACC is probably one of the weakest Power 5 conferences.
It is the weakest. I don't even think it's very close. Like the other ones, there's some, drama, and maybe they'll beat each other up like in the Pac-12, but in the ACC, it's just Clemson and a bunch of garbage.
Right, and you saw earlier this year Virginia have some flashes of, they were ranked, maybe they're going to be a decent team, maybe they'll be a competitor in the ACC this year, but since then they've fallen off. But this Wake Forest team, the number one player I like to watch for them is wide receiver Sage Surratt with 881 yards this year, 9 touchdowns. He's second in the nation. Really good player. Like you said, their offense is probably their highlight of that team. You don't really see much defense from them, obviously. I think as an ACC team, ACC teams are flat-out scorers. Aside from Clemson being the top dog, there's just not a lot of defense played in the ACC, but Sage Surratt has been easily Wake Forest's top player.
They got another wide receiver in Scotty Washington. At 24, we had Iowa State. The Cyclones, 5-2 on the year. Very, very well-coached team. I pretty much say it every time I talk about Iowa State, but Matt Campbell is definitely one of my favorite coaches in all of college football. Brock Purdy can ball. I believe he's top 5 in the nation right now in passing. So this Cyclones team is definitely one of them to talk about. And they're one of the few teams in the Big 12 that you can say has a competent defense.
Yeah, Iowa State, I mean, they're a surprisingly good defensive team, Chaz. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have been able to shut teams down.
They've been decent for years.
And that's one of the things that you can rely on the Cyclones, is they'll bring some good defense. Obviously, Brock Purdy, it starts and stops with Brock Purdy. When you look at just
over
the
2,000
ridiculous numbers this guy's put up, and then, it doesn't say a whole lot about beating Louisiana Monroe by 52 points, but when you're putting up 72 points, you're doing what you should. They lost a close one to Baylor, and that's one of the few times their defense has really failed them. But when I look at the rest of the schedule, a 24-point win over West Virginia, a 10-point win over Texas Tech. They're going to have to go on the road to play Oklahoma and then Texas in back-to-back weeks. That's going to define Iowa State's season. But for now, since I'm ranking it right after Week 7, I really like Iowa State at 24.
And you can't forget that just the absolute heartbreaking loss to Iowa.
Unbelievably
With
heartbreaking.
the tackle, the punt, and just the worst special teams you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
Everything that went wrong in that play went wrong.
Yeah.
And they lost.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think that's what's going to decide bottom tier teams. So, Iowa State, like you guys said, Brock Purdy absolutely balling out this year. There's no denying that. He's one of the top quarterbacks in the nation in my eyes. And I was honestly ready to write off Iowa State this year. I was ready to say they're done, they're toast. There's no chance they even make it back within the top 25. But the way Brock Purdy's looked over the past couple weeks, and honestly throughout the whole season, I think they're a legitimate 24. They definitely have their work cut out for them for the rest of the season, going up against Oklahoma and Texas. So it should be a fun matchup between both of those teams. So I'm excited to see Brock Purdy go up against Jalen Hurts and Sam Ehlinger in Texas. But I think Iowa State 24 is where I like to send them.
Moving on to our school, Arizona State. That was a tough one last week. That was really, really, really bad offensively. I think that was one of the worst offensive line performances that I've seen in forever. I mean, a lot of credit has to go to that Utah defensive line, which is one of the best in the entire country. However, it just felt like every single time Jaden Daniels dropped back to throw, he couldn't even complete his 3-step drop without being, without a defender in his face or someone hitting at his legs. And, Eno Benjamin, when they'd run his own read or even a basic handoff, he'd be hitting the backfield. And then he'd get up his rack yards, runs after contact. But, it was little by little. It was just, they couldn't do anything offensively. 2 times they got the ball inside the 30-yard line. It amassed to 3 points. They won the field position battle. They caused the turnovers. But Utah's defensive line just absolutely crushed any hope that ASU had of winning that football game.
Yeah, Chaz, I mean, that was the first game I saw Utah play like the team that Lee Corso thought was going to the college football playoff. And
they're definitely not out of it yet.
I thought that was a tough call at the beginning of the season, but if Utah continues to play like that towards the end, you have to wonder who would beat that team. I mean, they were absolutely stonewalling ASU on the defensive side, and on the offensive side, if you eliminate the turnovers, they're likely pouring on even more points than they eventually amassed against Arizona State. For Arizona State, though, that's pretty much to be expected. That was their brand, is that they'll play very well, and then they'll get to a crucial game, and they just won't show up. And
that's what ASU's been for years.
That's
they get ranked,
ASU.
They get some hype, and then they fall apart. It's sad to see. Obviously we go there and we're attend most of the games, but at the end of the day, this is a young team, and you have to look at the positives, I guess, if you're an ASU fan, and being like, look, the defense held Utah to under 30 points. They caused 4 turnovers. They won the field position battle. It's kind of hard when you don't have any time to run anything offensively.
Well, yeah, and also, Chaz, I mean, even though ASU did not play their best game, they still have the slate of their most important games coming up. All 3 games, USC, Oregon, Arizona, are going to be at home, right? So when you have these games at home, you have, obviously, especially in college, a much better chance of succeeding and winning those games. And if you finish 10-2 in your second year with Herm Edwards, I mean, obviously that's the best case scenario, but 10-2, 9-3 with a loss to Oregon there, and an outside chance in a New Year's Six bowl, you can't tell me that is not exceeding expectations for Herm Edwards in year 2. What do you think?
Yeah, honestly, Herm Edwards in year 2, I think he definitely, like you said, he's exceeding expectations already. This ASU team going into that game, both Utah and ASU were top-ranked defenses. There's no denying that. It was a defensive battle. I think the scoreboard doesn't tell the full story of the game. Like you said, Chaz, ASU won the turnover battle. They won the field position battle. But sloppy conditions and just you can't run the ball against this Utah offense. And ASU has identified themselves as a rushing team. Eno Benjamin has taken the reins of the offense and he's been running the ball more than I think anyone in the nation right now. But they had to just sloppy field conditions, raining, wet. It was really tough to watch that game. They weren't able to get anything going offensively. They had the ball inside the 30, inside the red zone multiple times, and just amounted to 3 points. So ASU at 23. I think that's best case scenario right now.
I think it's safe to say that Jaden Daniels might be having nightmares of Bradley and A for the next couple weeks. But, moving on to Appalachian State. They're undefeated. They beat North Carolina a couple weeks ago. But other than that, I mean, they blew out Louisiana Monroe by 50 points. It was 52-7. I mean, I find it hard to have them this high up. But at the end of the day, you can only beat the guys that you have in front of you, you know?
Right.
I mean, that's the UCF comparison, right? I mean, obviously I'm not comparing Appalachian State to UCF, but when you knock a team that isn't in the Power 5 for being 6-0 because, well, they haven't beat anyone, well, who do you want them to beat? Put them on the schedule, you know? So, I mean, they beat North Carolina. That's their one Power 5 or Division 1 Power 5 team, and they beat them. So you can't really fault Appalachian State. They beat North Carolina. North Carolina took Clemson down to the wire. I'm not saying that's the same team in both games, obviously, but they deserve to be ranked. I don't think they deserve to be ranked any higher than 22 where we have them right now.
Yeah, I think even having them at 22, it's kind of a stretch. I don't know much about this Appalachian State team, but I do know that their offense is good. They put up almost 43 points per game. They're 6-0. They have 19 rushing touchdowns. They're a rushing football team. Like you said, they took North Carolina. They beat North Carolina, a team that took Clemson down to the wire. But other than that, really, no competition, nothing really to compare them to against these top 25 teams.
And they're not really going to have any competition until they go and play South Carolina in a couple weeks. We'll see, if they're a legit team that can make a run into New Year's Six Bowl in terms of, one of the group of 5 teams that gets one of those spots in the New Year's Six. You mentioned Darrington Evans, their running back. He's got 10 touchdowns on the year. So offensively, they are good. Another offensive team that's pretty good, another group of 5, Boise State, we got a 21. 6-1 right now. True freshman quarterback Hank Bachmeier's looked pretty good. But at the end of the day, I just think this is a normal Boise State team. There's nothing special about them. They're Boise State. They're good. They're the best team in the Mountain West. But other than that, there's just not really anything special that I see in this team.
Yeah, this isn't the Kellen Moore team anymore, Chaz. I mean, these guys aren't going to the Natty anytime soon. But Boise State, I mean, to their credit, they're just a consistent team. I mean, what else can you say? I mean, in my opinion, you look at the stats. I mean, you have them up right now, Chaz. I mean, true freshman quarterback throwing for 1,500 yards. That's fairly good. That's average about 250, 200 yards per game. But not really anyone just statistically that stands out to me. They're just a good team. They're a very well-coached team. That's the one thing you can always say about Boise State. For the past 15 years, ever since Chris Peterson arrived in Boise, Idaho on campus and coaching on the blue turf, they have always come ready to play, and they've always been very well-coached.
Yeah, this is just a classic Boise State team, as you said earlier. They're always going to be that, 20, 25, like in between that 20 and 25 ranked team. There's nobody, like you said, that jumps out at you on the offense or defensive side of the football. They're just, overall a very well-coached team. They'll find the way to get wins. And, right now sitting at, 6-1, I think it is?
Yep. 6-1.
That's a classic Boise State team. Just so I think putting them any higher than 21 is a stretch. Putting them any lower than 21 is also a stretch. They're a classic Boise State team right now.
I did forget to mention that Bachmeier did get injured, so Chase Cord in the last 2 games has been the guy. Another younger quarterback that's been up and down. We're going to move on to the next 5 in the rankings. At number 20, Iowa. At number 19, a bit controversially, Michigan. Iowa 20, Michigan 19. Number 18, Cincinnati. Number 17, Minnesota. And number 16, SMU. Let's get right into a little bit of the controversy. Michigan and Iowa. I mean, Iowa, I've been saying it all season, they're another Iowa team. Michigan, very disappointing. I actually had them go into the playoff in our preseason show. I thought this was going to be the year that, the offense finally exploded with Shea Patterson. I thought Josh Gaddis could have been the guy. Turns out, no, they don't have an identity on offense. Defensively, they're not a classic Don Brown defense. They don't, stick to their assignments well. They're pretty much lost on the field at times. And man coverage, they're getting burned. They're just not a very good football team.
Well, I mean, let's
consider it compared to old Michigan teams.
Yeah, exactly. So let's first break down Iowa, and then we'll get to Michigan, because obviously I'm sure all three of us have some pretty strong takes on Michigan. So with Iowa, pretty much, Tyler, to me, the way Iowa goes is the way Nate Stanley goes. Right. I mean, sometimes Nate Stanley comes out slinging the rock like he's John Elway, and other times he looks like Nathan Peterman. And it really just all depends on what version of Nate Stanley are you getting on a weekly basis, because at times Nate Stanley, he really impresses me. He looks really good in some wins, and then other times he just leaves you scratching your head. I mean, looked really good against Purdue, looked atrocious against Michigan. They only amassed for 3 points, came into the game not throwing an interception in 10 games, and ends with 3.
That was one of the ugliest games that I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, it was brutal. It was brutal to watch all 4 quarters. And so that's the issue with Iowa. Unfortunately, Iowa, they have it's like a 1 free car wash coupon. It's one tight game under the lights at Kinnick Stadium in Iowa City every year. They've already played that. It was against Penn State. And naturally, what happened, Chaz? They took them down to the wire. I mean, it was 17-12. It was competitive throughout. But Iowa, when I look at the rest of their schedule, it's going to be tough because they're going to have to play Wisconsin, Minnesota, Northwestern. These are all pretty solid teams.
Iowa is a team that can take you down to the wire, but with Nate Stanley as their quarterback, he has shown time and time again that he just cannot get the job done in the clutch. I mean, for years and years. I think it's happened against Penn State 3 years in a row that they've been within 1 score, and Nate Stanley's had the football and hasn't been able to get it done.
Haven't been able to get it done.
He just, like you said, he can sling the rock for 3 quarters, but in the 4th quarter, it all falls apart. And there's a reason that, they have 2 losses on their schedule, one being to the team we've ranked just above them, and, the ugliest game of the year, in my opinion. And it was, ugly is a nice term.
Yeah.
It was horrendous football.
Yeah.
If you were a football coach, I think you'd pop a blood vessel watching the game. It was, the assignments, it was so poorly just executed.
Well, I'll tell you who I really felt bad for. It was Gus Johnson. I mean, I can't believe we wasted the golden, talented voice of Gus Johnson on that.
There was no screaming and no yelling. He was just
screaming.
Incomplete pass.
And a punt. And
tackle behind the line of
fair
scrimmage.
Catch.
I'm all for defensive brilliance in games.
Yeah, but that was offensive ineptity. Yeah,
exactly.
You're right. You're totally right. Defense is obviously a great defensive game is great to watch, but
defense wins championships.
Yes,
we've heard it forever.
That was not a great defensive game. That was a horrible offensive game, and Nate Stanley. He's like you said. He's good for the first 3 quarters, and then someone else comes into the game. It's not Nate Stanley anymore.
Look, some NFL team is going to be very happy to have them as his 3rd-string quarterback. So
he definitely has the arm talent, to make it in the NFL. But the intangible side and
no, he's not taking anyone. He's not taking anyone to the playoffs. But
exactly.
I mean, he could have basically what C.J. Beathard has, career backup.
Yeah. I do feel bad for him though. As I'm looking at the stats now, I see he's been sacked 17 times on the year.
Wow.
So after every game he's taking a long ice bath. The offensive line is giving him almost no protection. And, you kind of feel bad for the guy.
You do, but I'm not trying to bag on Nate Stanley here. However, when you watch him play, watch a little bit of his film, a good amount of those sacks are him just not being decisive in his decision-making.
Yeah, he's
right.
He
holds the football. He second-guesses himself way too much. And it's not something that you would expect from a senior quarterback. And it's something that, we all wanted to see him take that next step. And, if you see it, sling it. If it's not there, take off and run or throw it away. It's something that it's something you got to learn. And for some reason, it just hasn't clicked in his brain. Maybe it will click one day later this season, but at this point, it's not. Again, Michigan. We all know on this show, it's been probably the most talked about team just because of how disappointing and how bad. I mean, they've been awful at times this year.
Chaz,
the fact that they're ranked 19th it's just the fact. It's all based on 247 Sports and being like, oh, this guy was a 5-star recruit. Oh, he was good at Ole Miss. Yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, I honestly, this Michigan team this year has been probably one of the worst that I can say
It's the worst
one
under
of the
Jim
worst that
Harbaugh.
we've seen in recent years. And yes, I would say one of the worst we've seen from Jim Harbaugh. Shea Patterson has played horrendously this year. I don't think there's any way around it. You went into the season, I think almost everyone went into the season with expectations that Michigan was going to finish as a top 5 team and compete for the college football playoff and possibly win the Big Ten this year. But seeing the way that they've played this year, their game against Army, 2 bad losses already on the season, Shea Patterson has not played nearly as well as everyone thought that he was going to play. I think 19 is even high for them.
All right, well, as the face of Michigan fandom at the Cronkite School, Chaz, I'm actually going to take a different route here. As disappointing as Michigan has been, they played actually fairly well against Penn State. I was actually kind of happy with how they finished that game. For once, Michigan came into a road game and showed the smallest bit of enthusiasm to winning the game. They did not play scared. Now, they played scared to start the game, and that's why they were down 21-0. But at the end, it looked like the Michigan team that we were promised in the preseason. With Josh Gaddis, speed and space, we're going to be explosive, we're going to throw it down the field. And they finally did that. And what it did, Chez, is it opened up the running game just enough for Jim Harbaugh to start reestablishing that offense that has made him a multimillionaire. In between the tackles, outside zones, get it out to your tight ends, get it out to your receivers across the middle. If this is the Michigan team that finishes out the season, look, everything's still in front of Michigan. Yes, the playoff's out, the Big Ten championship is out. But Michigan's goal this season, Jim Harbaugh is only going to get fired if one thing happens. If he loses Michigan State and he loses Ohio State at home. He's gone after that. I don't care who you are, how much you like Jim, he's gone after that. If he beats Michigan State and Ohio State, it turns the program around. I firmly believe it because Michigan, it's the problem with Michigan, guys, is you look at their schedule every year and you go, okay, Penn State at home, it's winnable. Wisconsin, Michigan State, they're kind of mediocre. They could beat them. And then you get to week 12 and you go, all right, they're going to lose. They're going to lose. Yep. So they could go the whole season winning, but they're going to lose that last game. And you know what the problem is? They know that. The coaches know it. The fans know it. The quarterback knows it. And they come into the biggest game of their lives, and they play like they've never picked up a football before. And it's happened every year since 2003. And it's a shame. But unless it could happen again this year, Chaz, and he's going to be gone if it does. Look, all they need to do, I know it's sad that this is the expectation for Michigan fans now, is to just not roll over and die when they play Ohio State, but that's what they need. Just don't give up 62 points this time around. Show some heart. If they do, then he'll stick around. But it starts this week with Notre Dame.
I just have one thing about Michigan. The first 3 quarters, same thing happened against Wisconsin. Penn State, same thing. They just don't play football offensively. And then they realize, we're down 21 points. We're down 28-0. We got to do something. Then they start throwing the football down the field to their big wide receivers. Yeah. I just don't understand why Josh Gaddis and why this Michigan team just can't do it in the first quarter. Like, they have no identity on offense.
I mean, do you know how many points Michigan has in the first quarter this year?
They have, nothing. I saw the stats. It's terrible.
3 points in the first quarter.
That is appalling because...
That is appalling. How are you supposed to win a football game?
90% of football teams, this is even in Division I, Division II, NFL, whatever, script your first 10 to 20 plays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all scripted. That's all on the offensive coordinator.
That's actually... Really, if you think about it, Chaz, the point of the game you should be doing the best because those are the plays that you've run through and practiced the whole week. Mm-hmm. But it seems like Michigan gets in their way too much. It's Tyler, it seems like they're playing themselves more than they're playing the other team sometimes.
No, yeah, exactly. 3 points all season in the first quarter. Teams are supposed to be getting out to a hot start in the first quarter. That's, like you said, plays are supposed to be scripted in the first quarter. That's when you're supposed to be playing your best football. That's when you get your team out to a hot start. You establish your game plan for the day. You see what works. You see what doesn't work, and that's what helps you win football games. if they have 3 points in the first quarter all season long, that's telling you they're barely even going out to try to win these football games.
Yeah. We'll move on to a former Ohio State assistant and interim head coach's team. Luke Fickell's Cincinnati Bearcats are at 18. The only loss coming in the blowout against Ohio State, but aside from that game, they've looked really good.
Yeah, my thing with Cincinnati is they came into the season with a lot of expectations. Luke Fickell has done a good job there. I think he's done a really good job. He's taken Cincinnati, a team that really hasn't had a lot of success since Brian Kelly left all those years ago, and he's turned them into a perennial contender in the American. And they've kind of filled the void of Houston. But what Fickell's done is he's turned that into the defensive team. If you look at some of their standout guys, absolutely outstanding defense coming from Derek Forrest all year long. I mean, that's the guy to watch for me. But, Tyler, what are your thoughts on Cincinnati?
Yeah, like you said, they've definitely turned it around this season after coming off that 42-0 blowout that they had against Ohio State. They've come back. They've beaten the self-acclaimed reigning national champions, UCF, and they beat Houston in a good game, Tulsa, and then they got East Carolina this week. So I think Cincinnati, like you said, they're a good defensive football team. Other than that, they don't really have much of an identity offensively, I would say. But, it is inviting to see the turnaround that they've had since that blowout against Ohio State.
At 17, we have the undefeated Minnesota Golden Gophers. PJ Flex boys are rowing the boat right now, and they're undefeated. And Minnesota fans are talking Rose Bowl. As crazy as that might sound, they're talking Rose Bowl.
Oh, my goodness. No.
They are. I'm not a Minnesota fan. I do know Minnesota fans, though. And they are talking Rose Bowl a lot.
Yeah,
As crazy as it sounds. Minnesota, if they win out, they'll be in the Rose Bowl.
Here's the difference between Minnesota and Michigan fans, right? Michigan expects to go to the Rose Bowl by winning. Minnesota is praying that Ohio State wins out. And so even if they get smashed in the Big Ten title game, they'll be like, okay, we're going to Pasadena. We have a chance. I mean, that's Minnesota, but I'll give PJ Fleck some credit. Is this year 3 now? This is year 3. And typically college coaches get 3 years to show some improvement. PJ Fleck has taken a team at Minnesota that was dead in the water after Jerry Kill left, and he's made them a contender in the Big Ten West. And in my opinion, there's 2 just atrocious conferences. Which one? Well, I want to ask Chaz, which division is Clemson in? Are they in the Coastal or the Atlantic?
I believe they're in the Atlantic.
So the other one, whatever one Clemson's in, the other one is terrible.
Right.
Because whatever they're putting out every year, the ACC title game is always Clemson.
Yes, Clemson is in the Atlantic.
Is in Clemson, so the Coastal. Because the Coastal is, let's see, we got Virginia, Pittsburgh, oh my goodness, Duke, Virginia Tech, North Carolina, Georgia Tech, and Miami.
I got a stat for you real quick. In the last 7 years, they've had 7 winners in that division.
Yeah.
Or it might be 8 years, or last 8 years, 7 winners.
Yeah, it's pathetic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an absolute tire fire. In the, what is it? The Coastal? Yeah, so the Coastal. So Coastal's number 1 on my terrible divisions list. Number 2, the Big Ten West. Terrible. It's either Wisconsin or a bunch of crap. But, Tyler, right. Minnesota, they're starting to establish the brand now.
I guess you could say they're establishing something in Minnesota. I mean, you look at their opponents so far that they've played this year. San Diego State, Fresno State. All these games have been relatively close games. Yes, they're an undefeated team. And they've yet to really prove themselves. They have 3 ranked matchups coming up. Later on this season, they go up to play Penn State, Iowa, and Wisconsin. So those are going to be their 3 real tests this season. I don't think they're going to fare well in any of them, to be completely honest with you. I don't see Minnesota coming out with a win in any of those 3 games. Like you said, the Big Ten West is just, it's a cakewalk. There's really no teams that compete there other than Wisconsin. So I think Minnesota is, right now at 17, I think that they are the biggest, I don't know the right words to use, but I guess you could call it the biggest joke at 17.
Yeah, they're the pretender. You know what Minnesota reminds me of, Chaz? 2018 Northwestern. Just a team that makes the title game. And I'm not even saying they will make the title game, but if they do, you'll kind of look at it and you go, man, Ohio State and Minnesota, how did they get there? Mm-hmm. And you go back and, okay, I mean, they played Purdue and they played Iowa. I mean, they played all these teams, but none of them are good enough, you know?
Well, what I will say about Minnesota and the Big Ten West, for that matter, is that it's not as bad as the Coastal and the ACC. I don't even think it's close because at least in the Big Ten West, every once in a while or every year there's a team that's good. This is a down year for Northwestern. Yeah. But they're a good program. They're a good program. Iowa, solid program. Recently they haven't had a team that's going to push for a playoff, but year in and year out they're getting 7 to 9 wins. And then Wisconsin. Yes, they did just blow a complete loss, like the worst loss of the season, the biggest upset, to Illinois, who's been an absolute crap fire for the last decade. Yes, Lovie Smith is sort of turning things around, kind of, but, I mean, everybody else is just kind of boof. Like Purdue, they're without their quarterback and best player. But still, it's not as bad as Virginia. Like, come on. I mean, when Virginia
that's the best
is the best. Virginia and North Carolina are going to go to the championship game in your conference. Come on.
Look, I just want to say, if the Coastal Conference existed in basketball, oh my God, what a division. I mean, you have Duke, North Carolina, and Virginia. Unfortunately, this isn't on the hardwood. This is on the football field. And if you look at the Coastal, I mean, this could be a topic for another time, Chaz, but the ACC may want to realign their division because right now it's not very good. To have Florida State and Clemson in the same division and Miami, who is good once out of the last 15 years as like the headliner in the Coastal, wow.
I mean, I don't think it's as bad as you're making it sound like in terms of power because Florida State is an absolute dumpster fire. Willie Taggart, I mean, that is a crapshoot of a program. Considering the amount of talent that they have on that football team and the amount of talent that they have in their backyard in Florida, they should be doing better. Miami as well.
Not just them, but like if you think about it, how is Florida State and Miami, how do they suck so bad when they're in?
It's because they're losing. Clemson is taking the best players out of Florida.
Yes, exactly.
Clemson's taking the best players out of Florida. And then the other ones are going to the University of Florida. So that's the problem that they have. A team that does not have a problem, they're absolutely rolling, is the SMU Mustangs. Like I mentioned earlier, my player of the week, Shane Buechele, having an absolute phenomenal season this year. They have a great wide receiver who had probably the catch of the year, debatable, and James Prochet. This is a darn good football team.
Yeah, I mean, I like SMU. Stan gang or no gang. I mean, SMU, who hasn't been ranked this high this late in the season since the Pony Express days with Eric Dickerson. I mean, you look at SMU with Sonny Dykes, they have absolutely turned the program that was dead in the water for 20 years around and have actually made them respectable. 20?
I think you got to roll the clock back a little bit longer than that.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, it's been 20, 25 years. I mean, the last time I can remember a good SMU team, and I can't personally remember, but like statistically speaking, probably 84, 83. I mean, it's been a long time coming for SMU, and it all started with getting that transfer from Texas and Shane Buechele, who has turned this program around. SMU went from the low man on the totem pole in Texas, and right now, if I'm looking at Texas teams, SMU and Texas A&M would be a good game, and that is actually surprising that I'm saying this sentence in 2019, but it would be a good game.
No, yeah, exactly. SMU has, I think I would say one of the greatest turnarounds we've seen in college football in recent years. They've gone from a complete nobody in football, and they've turned it around. They're an undefeated team. They just beat Houston earlier tonight, and right now sitting at 16, they're an undefeated team. Like you said, Shane Buechele has played out of his mind this year. Turned this football team completely around. Just the other week, like you said, with the 6 touchdown passes. He's 7th in the nation in passing yards right now. SMU has absolutely exceeded, I think, all expectations going into this year.
One Texas team to 2 others as we get into the next couple rankings in the show's rankings this week. Number 15, the Texas Longhorns. Number 14, another Texas team, the Baylor Bears. Number 13, the Utah Utes. Number 12, Wisconsin. And number 11, Auburn. I mean, we segue really easily into Texas. Obviously, 5-2 is the reason they're this far, down in the rankings. But Tom Herman has done a really good job with this Texas program. Shane Buechele is a really good quarterback. We can't deny that. Colin Johnson is an absolute beast. But at the end of the day, they did not get it done in their 2 biggest games of the year so far.
I mean, Sam Ehlinger has been about the best quarterback Texas has had since Colt McCoy. And I feel very confident in saying that. Texas' struggle isn't on offense. I mean, they've got an absolute dude at wide receiver in Colin Johnson. Eagles on the other side is a tall guy, but he can't catch. I mean, he's had some opportunities, specifically in the Red River rivalry, and he had about 3 drops in that game. But it all comes down to the secondary. I mean, they're about 120th in the nation as a collective secondary. Their total defense, not very good. I mean, so whenever Tom Herman does establish a defense, that's when we're going to say officially that Texas is quote-unquote back. But right now, to be ranked 15th, and just from where they were a couple years ago under Charlie Strachan, an absolute dumpster fire, to where they are now, a perennially ranked top 15 team, yeah, Texas is back.
Yeah, definitely. I think Texas is a good football team. Their defense, like you said, Jack, it's not good. Their offense hasn't been their issue this year.
I just checked in the stat. They're 119th in the country in total defense.
Yeah.
Right.
And I was throwing that number out there, and I was off by 1.
Speaking volumes right now.
Yeah.
Their defense has been their problem all year long. Look, they had 2 tough losses. They played Oklahoma, and they lost. And then their other loss was against LSU. Yes, right. 2 tough losses. And they weren't blowout losses like we'd expect from a poor defense. It was definitely carried by Sam Ehlinger in that offense. Ehlinger, 28 total touchdowns and over 2,300 yards in the season. I think he's a sleeper for a Heisman candidate coming down this stretch. If he continues this play and if he can, pull out a couple big wins in the last couple games of the season against Iowa State and Baylor and Texas Tech, you never know.
So here's the deal. It's actually extremely possible for Texas to play Oklahoma again with the round-robin style that the Big 12 has. The Big 12 title game could end up being Oklahoma and Texas one more time. It'd be interesting to see if Texas makes the right adjustments. In terms of the Heisman candidacy, it's tough when you have 2 games against Heisman candidates and you lose both.
Right.
And that's pretty much like we have college football playoff eliminator games, Chaz. We have Heisman eliminator games.
And not only did they lose those games, the teams that won, Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts, had great games.
Yeah.
Ehlinger played well.
Yeah.
But he wasn't great. And that was, maybe the difference in those football games. Moving on to, we've been talking a lot about turnarounds. Probably the biggest turnaround in college football has been Baylor. Matt Rule took over a team that lost 12 games a couple years ago. 12 games a couple years ago. Right now they're undefeated. They're ranked. And they're playing really good football. They beat a really good Iowa State team a couple weeks ago. This has been so fun to watch, a program that looked like it was about to die off after, they had a great success for years. And then they got hit with scandal. Matt Rule came in, took over, he toughed it out for a few years, and now they're playing really good football again. And like you said, recruiting matters. They're in Texas. There are a lot of good football players in Texas. It's basically, probably in terms of states, when you're talking about culture, no state is more linked with football than Texas. And like I said, this team, this program are definitely headed in the right direction.
Look, if places like the Midwest are soup kitchens, then Texas is an all-you-can-eat buffet of recruits. I mean, there's more than enough to go around to all these schools. You know what it comes down to for Baylor? You can say, well, they haven't played anyone. Iowa State was a pretty tough test. I mean, that's a ranked win. here's where it gets tough for Baylor. They're going to have 2 games at the end of this season against Oklahoma and Texas. However, they're going to get both of them at home. So maybe a chance for the Baylor Bears to kind of sneak in the back door of this Big 12 race. A lot of people kind of narrowing it down to Texas and Oklahoma already. I mean, I was guilty of that just a few minutes ago. But, I mean, again, Baylor's going to get Oklahoma and Texas at home. And these are going to be big games because their next 2 games, West Virginia and TCU. That TCU game right before Oklahoma, though, Chaz and Tyler, that's what we call the trap game. When you get your eyes focused on a top 5 opponent like Oklahoma, if they're not ready to go against TCU, the Horned Frogs could sneak up on them. So that's my concern about Baylor right now. But right now, I think we have them good at 14.
Yeah, moving on to a team that did not get trapped last week, Utah. Again, I think we discussed this game a lot.
Yeah.
But from a Utah perspective, Bradley and that defensive line they just dominated that game. Like, they took it over. Offensively, Tyler Huntley, we're going to see what type of injury he has. That could really derail their season because aside from him, their options at quarterback are they're not going to get the job done. And if Utah has a hope and has a desire to try and get back into that college football playoff discussion, going at 11-1 as a Pac-12 champion, they need Tyler Huntley. They have Zach Moss. That guy's an absolute beast. He broke the all-time Utah rushing record last week against the Sun Devils. But this team could be completely derailed with the loss of their quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. The injury to Tyler Huntley, unfortunate. It was last season. I think he had the same thing happen to him, an injury, season-ending, after he'd come back, worked his way back into the starting position, season-ending injury. You would just hate to see the same thing happen again this year, as Utah's having a great season this year. Their defense is absolutely crushing opponents' spirits. There's no doubt about that. They're one of the top defenses in the nation, top rushing defense in the nation. And but they had the bad loss to USC earlier this year. So I think them moving up in the ranks is unlikely, but sitting where they are right now, 13, I like them there, and I just, you just really hope Huntley is okay to play the rest of the season.
They definitely could move up the rankings just based on who has to play each other. Because you got the Big 12 team or the Big 10 teams that all got to play each other, all the SEC teams that got to play each other. So Oregon and Utah are definitely not out of the playoff,
right?
The playoff picture, if you will. So it's just going to be whether or not they can keep winning in the Pac-12, a conference that over the last couple of years has just beaten the living crap out of each other.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're doing it again. You got teams with talent like USC with awful coaching.
Yeah.
And then you got teams with good coaching with not as much talent, maybe like a Washington State, that can beat anyone on any Saturday.
And the thing with Utah, if this was an 8-team playoff, they're right there. But, I mean, this is the argument for an 8-team playoff is they're not a top 4 team. And no matter how it plays out, record-wise, I don't care if they win out. Utah is not better than Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, LSU, or Oklahoma. They're just not. From talent-wise to coaching-wise, as much as I love Kyle Whittingham, and he does a phenomenal job in Salt Lake City, he doesn't. But if we were going to ever expand the playoff to 8 teams, Utah deserves a fighting chance. Unfortunately, they just, with their quarterback, like you mentioned, Chaz, they just don't have all the pieces right now. What Utah would need to get in the playoff is a Heisman. They would need a Heisman Trophy level candidate, and they would need an extraordinarily absurd amount of help. But again, their path to the Pac-12 title game is wide open right now. I mean, as long as they don't trip and fall over themselves. ASU is essentially 2 games back because of the tiebreaker. And so what you're looking at is Utah. They're going to cruise to Santa Clara and then most likely play Oregon. They win that game, they go to the Rose Bowl. I think that's a damn good year for the Utah Utes.
And that defensive line, they can play against anyone.
Yeah.
They can match up against Alabama, Clemson, LSU, whoever you want, and they're going to give an offense problems. They're going to cause issues for that quarterback. Moving on to another team's defense, who has been great all season up until last week. And the biggest upset of the year by far, Wisconsin fell on the road to Illinois. Guys, it was hard to watch especially being that I was finally starting to think that this might have been Wisconsin's year. You know, Jim Leonard's defense looking phenomenal. Jack Cohn was starting to put things together offensively. Jonathan Taylor dominating as always. And I thought they were going to come into Illinois and, win by 42-7. But Brandon Peters and Matter Bebe, the USC transfer, they had other thoughts. Lovie Smith, my whole family, Chicago Bears fans, love Lovie. And Lovie got it done.
They got it done in Champaign. That's like you said to open the show. I mean, what an insane upset. I turned the game off when it was 23-13 because I thought, all right, no way. Illinois, they're down 10. They're going to lose this game. Illinois, they've showed a lot of heart the past 2 weeks. They almost came back against Michigan. They were a couple points away, 3 points away from tying the game. They were down 28-0 and then scored 25 unanswered. And likewise, they did it to Wisconsin. I mean, I don't know if I want to say Lovie Smith is starting the turnaround because what is the ceiling really for Illinois?
He's been there for a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, so what is the ceiling though? I mean, you have to decide: is it 9-3? Is it 8-4? Because I mean, from where they started to where they are now, though, Lovie Smith has done a great coaching job. Brandon Peters has developed into a fairly serviceable quarterback. I think when he was at Michigan, he was expected to be the next Andrew Luck. That was what he was recruited to be with Jim Harbaugh, but obviously that didn't pan out. But he's become a serviceable quarterback, and again, in the Big Ten West, you're going to have your opportunities to get wins.
Look, when it's all said and done, this is Wisconsin's classic mid-season fail.
It's a bad loss. There's no
getting around it. It's a horrible loss. But when you look at it this way, they still have the best defense in the country in my eyes. There's no getting around that point either. Their defense, top in the country for yards allowed, top in the country for points allowed. And, Jonathan Taylor, he's still an absolute beast. He's got 15 touchdowns on the season. He was my lock to win Heisman going into the season. But getting around a loss like that, I think it's the classic Wisconsin, mid-season slide. They lose last week to Illinois. They had, just like you said earlier, it was a perfect trap game. They had their eyes set on Ohio State, and they weren't prepared. And they faced the consequences because now they're even less prepared for Ohio State this week.
The sad thing for the Badgers is that this loss last week might be the type of loss that keeps you out of a college football playoff. We've seen it before, that as a one-loss team, one loss can derail your whole season. Whether or not you're the conference champion or not, if you have a really, really awful loss like this, it happened to Ohio State a couple years ago. If you lose, just nobody, you're going to pay the price.
Well, I think what matters is that Oklahoma and Ohio State each had one loss last year. But why did Oklahoma get it over Ohio State, even though Ohio State had more top 25 wins? Well, because Oklahoma lost to Texas by 3 points, and Ohio State got run over in West Lafayette to Purdue. And so, like you said, this is the type of loss where even if Wisconsin beats Ohio State this weekend, you're still going to point back when it comes down to picking time. And you go, man, they lost to Illinois? Yeah, that's tough. I mean, we can't put a team in like that. They may get exposed. And so, yeah, I think you can almost write Wisconsin off. Unless they beat Ohio State twice, which would occur this week and then possibly in the Big Ten title game.
Moving on up in our rankings, we had Auburn, but I want to get into the team above them, Oregon. Obviously, I have a little bit of an issue with this. However, based on the way the points work and how we each have our own ranking systems, which we will reveal. I don't think we need to reveal a whole top 25 this week. We'll just probably do the top. We'll do the top 12 because top 12, 13, because that's really where the difference is in our rankings. We'll get to that a little sooner or in a little bit. But Oregon is ranked above of Auburn, despite the fact that Auburn beat them in the first week of the season. Auburn, they got a big game this week. It's the game of the weekend against LSU, who I think has been the best team in the entire country. So, Bo Nix and all those, Bo Nix, true freshman, another test.
Bo Nix,
I love the guy. He comes up in the clutch. However, I think this is going to be his biggest test.
It's at LSU, correct?
Oh, yeah, it's in Death Valley. Night game.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry. I mean, this will be a tough game for Tom Brady to go in and pull out a W. Death Valley is just a tough place to play. It's hard to hear. It's hard to hear yourself think. It's a hostile atmosphere. You're a true freshman. I mean, I don't know about you. I'm 19 years old. Bo Nix is a year younger than I am. You're younger than you are, Chaz.
Mm-hmm.
I would not be ready to have 100,000 people screaming at me for 3 hours. I don't think I have the type of capacity to handle that. And look, I know Bo Nix has been training for this moment, but this is also an LSU team that can get after the quarterback and can put points up on the board. And unless Bo Nix gets into a track meet with Joe Burrow, who is on pace to win the Heisman right now, in my opinion, they're not going to come out with this win. The reason I put Auburn behind Oregon is Auburn, in my opinion, is going to lose this week, and they're also going to lose to Alabama. They're going to end up 9-3 on the year. Now, obviously, we're talking about this week and where they're ranked, but Oregon played Auburn extremely hard. It took a heroic effort from Bo Nix down the stretch to rescue that Auburn team from the clutches of what looked to be a statement win for the Pac-12. And so that's why I got Oregon above Auburn right now, because I think if they ran that back in Eugene, I'm taking the Ducks. Because the Ducks under Mario Cristobal, what a turnaround defensively. I mean, Oregon for every year under Chip Kelly, it was, we're going to score more points than you. We don't care if you
Basically
get in
the way
end zone.
Oklahoma plays.
Yes.
Right.
We're just going to outscore you. Because every time we get the ball, we're going to score. And we don't care if you guys score because we'll just score more. And that's not the case anymore. They actually go out and they have an emphasis on defense. They don't just try and play defense. Their defensive emphasis is the makeup of this team. So I really like Oregon at 10, and I like Auburn at 11.
Yeah, like you said, the whole defensive emphasis for Oregon. This year, they have 22 sacks on the season and 12 interceptions. I think that's 12 interceptions puts them in the top 5 in the nation. Their one loss was against Auburn. I have Auburn actually higher than them. I have Auburn up at 8. But I'll get to them in a little bit. But Justin Herbert has played out of his mind this year, too. It's just the 1 interception on the season, 21 total touchdowns. He's played great. And he's played to what everyone thought he was, especially last week against Washington, the 4 touchdowns to really help, propel them in that win over Washington, which was a very close game. He had the game-winning drive in the end of the fourth quarter that really put Oregon over the top. But I like Oregon at 10 right now, and I have Auburn at 8 actually. I like Auburn a little bit higher up. They beat Oregon, which, as we said earlier, Oregon's a really good defensive team. But Bo Nix this week, like you said, he's in for one. He's in for a tough matchup, and true freshman, I don't know if he's going to handle it.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be unlike anything he's ever faced. And he's faced a lot already as a young quarterback, being a true freshman, and games down to the wire. However, in my opinion, I always see head-to-head as one of the most important things. So for right now, I have to have Auburn ahead of Oregon. However, down the road, I think Oregon will be ahead of them because, like you said, Auburn's probably going to lose a couple games. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're able to, pull off an upset here and there. They have the talent. Their defensive line can get after the quarterback.
Yeah.
Bo Nix, we've seen him. He can make some plays. Gus Malzahn can pull out some magic in his play calling. So this is a good Auburn football team. We can't forget that. On the Oregon side of it, I think Justin Herbert's been good. I wouldn't say he's been great. Yes, the stats are really, really good. However, I think at times he's missed some throws and missed a lot of reads in crucial times, especially on third down a lot this season, where it hasn't been quite as good as the stats, 21 touchdowns to 1 interception may appear. However, 1 interception all year, you can't avoid that. The guy's not making a ton of horrendous mistakes. And Oregon, they got some playmakers. They got a really good tight end that they lost for the season. So we'll see how that affects them going down the road. However, they're a darn good football team, and I expect them to run the Pac-12 and finish the season with only 1 loss. Moving on to the we're already into the top 10. Moving on to the top 9, we'll Why don't we just go all the way to the top?
Yeah.
Usually we go from 9 to 7, we reveal ours. However, this week there's been a lot of discrepancy, a lot of drama between the teams and the rankings. We all have pretty much different top 10s. So we'll just start down from 9. At 9 we have the Georgia Bulldogs. Number 8, Notre Dame. Number 7, Florida. Number 6, Penn State. Number 5, Oklahoma. Number 4, Clemson. Number 3, Alabama. Number 2, Ohio State. And number 1, LSU. Number 9, Georgia. That was a bad loss. South Carolina, they had all the chances to win that football game. South Carolina could have won the game in the fourth quarter. They could have won it in overtime, and they didn't. They gave Georgia the football. Jake Fromm and the Bulldogs just could not get it done.
Yeah, so this is actually, so you're talking about how head-to-head is a big factor for you. I'm surprised you picked the Auburn-Oregon ranking that we had as the one to make your claim on. I think Georgia and Notre Dame is more of an intriguing reverse there, because Georgia and Notre Dame have also played each other this year, and it was Georgia that came away with the win. Unfortunately, we got to rank Georgia below Notre Dame because Notre Dame's one loss came to Georgia, and Georgia's one loss came to South Carolina with their third-string quarterback. I mean, so that to me, it's going to be tough for Georgia to get back in the playoff conversation. Obviously, they're an SEC team, but the SEC bias in college football that already exists, if they win out, they'll be in the playoff.
Oh yeah, no. If
Guaranteed.
you beat Alabama or LSU in the SEC championship game, you're a one-loss SEC champion. You will be in the playoff.
You're fine.
There's no denying
You're
that.
fine. I mean, they're not gonna block the SEC from the playoff.
And then going to your point about the discrepancy between who's and who, in my rankings, I actually had Notre Dame at 7.
yeah,
So I think I had Notre Dame significantly ahead of them. And
Yeah.
I think they've improved since that Georgia game. Whereas Georgia, offensively especially, losing their offensive coordinator has really hurt this Georgia team. This season, there just hasn't been a lot of creativity on offense. It seems so not just conservative, but just cut and dry. Hand the ball off up the middle. There's no misdirection in these things. Jake Fromm, obviously, he's got a lot of young wide receivers, but Jake Fromm is an experienced quarterback. He's got a lot of arm talent. This guy's going to be playing on Sundays fairly soon. There's talent to work with, and it seems like they're just not using it in a creative way to keep the defense on their toes. It's almost like you know what's coming before it happens.
yeah. The thing is, Tyler, that Chaz made a good point. It's not the same team that had Nick Chubb and Sony Michel.
No, not at all. And I think the most important thing to note is that Fromm has gone ice cold in these last 2 games.
Yeah, he's
Against South Carolina, he had 3 interceptions, and then last week I think he only threw for, I don't even think he eclipsed 100 yards last week. And it's the worst possible time for this to happen. They got Florida in 2 weeks. They have Auburn after that. And if they really want to make their claim to get back into the playoffs, and if they want to make it to their conference championship game, they're going to have to win these games, and Fromm's going to need to step up big time. It's not the time for him to go cold.
Jake Fromm, as consistent as he has been in his career, hasn't really been the guy to put the team on his back. And when your play calling's not great, and maybe when DeAndre Swift isn't having the best game, it's going to be the biggest question of this Georgia season is whether or not Jake Fromm can pull something, magical out of the hat and win you a football game. We all know he has the talent to do it. It's just whether or not he's going to actually do it. I don't know. We'll see. Number 8, Notre Dame. A quarterback I actually do believe has a bit of magic in him. Ian Book. I really like him a lot. He can throw the ball down the field, but he can also pick up first downs in the run game with his legs.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I think he's a great quarterback, Ian Book is, but I'm not high on this Notre Dame team. I got to be honest. I think they're a good football team, but I think having them at 8 is a little high for me. I actually had them down at 11, but I think the biggest issue with them is being an independent team, and especially when it comes down to looking at the rankings or the playoff rankings. They don't have a conference championship game. they don't play consistent opponents. You don't have anyone to compare them to within a conference because they're not in a conference. But like you said, Book is a great quarterback. He's able to get it done both with his arm and with the legs. I'm just not really sold on this Notre Dame team right now.
Here's what I'll say about Notre Dame. They have a running back, Chaz, that averages 7 yards a carry. That's Tony Jones.
He's a beast.
Absolute beast. And the way to beat Michigan is if you can run the ball against Michigan, you're going to tear them to pieces. Jonathan Taylor ran hog wild on Michigan. The problem with Michigan is that they're not set up to get run over. That's Don Brown's gamble. I have so many talented guys up front, and I'm going to blitz the crap out of you on every play, that basically you can't run the ball. You're forced to throw it, and I'm still going to be blitzing you, and you have to get the ball off under 3 seconds, or we're going to sack you. If you can hold your water at the point of attack, like Notre Dame can, their offensive line, 4 upperclassmen on that offensive line, it's going to be so hard for Michigan unless they have all hands on deck again with their stout defensive line. Kwity Paye, Josh Uche, Aiden Hutchinson, those are some really good guys. They got after Sean Clifford for about the first time that Penn State's allowed quarterback pressure all season, but that's the intriguing matchup for Notre Dame. It's not the quarterback battle. It's going to be Notre Dame's offensive line versus Michigan's defensive line. That's going to dictate who's going to win Saturday night with Chris Fowler and Herb Street. So what I want people to be looking out for with this Notre Dame-Michigan game, first couple runs that Notre Dame tries. If it's successful, they're going to stick with it all night. They're not going to use Ian Book as much as we think. If they're unsuccessful, look for Ian Book to throw 40, 45 times to try and get the win.
See, I see where you're coming from. However, I think that they're going to get Tony Jones involved no matter what happens, whether that is just with direct handoffs or using the zone read with Ian Book and allowing him to use his legs a little bit more to open up the game for Tony Jones, which they have done a lot this season. Another guy we got to look at is Khalid Kareem. The defensive lineman for Notre Dame has been absolutely dominant this year. He basically took over that Virginia game. And, I mean, the guy he annihilated that offensive line. Like, Khalid Kareem is an absolute beast. I know we use the word beast a lot, but I think this Notre Dame team gets a lot of disrespect, and it's all based off that Clemson loss. And we have to think of, you got to look at it. Notre Dame lost to Clemson by about the same that Alabama did in the national championship. Brian Kelly is a really good head coach, and Notre Dame is a darn good football team that just kind of gets hated on at times, I feel like, unjustly.
Notre Dame, Chaz, is the team that maximizes their talent. I mean, you're not going to get top 5 talent at Notre Dame anymore because it's a Catholic school that regards their grades very well. They're not going to use some of the recruiting methods the SEC does or other Power 5 schools. So Brian Kelly, in my opinion, year in, year out, should be a Coach of the Year candidate because right now he's maximizing what he's got. I mean, Notre Dame, their ceiling is number 5, number 4. I don't think you'll ever see a Notre Dame team get to number 1 ever again, just because of the challenges that coaching in South Bend come with.
See, I do see the challenges. However, I do think that they can get back to number 1. I wouldn't want to say, never under Brian Kelly because Brian Kelly, like we've said, is a darn good head football coach. If you look over the past 10 years, I believe he's top 3 in wins alongside Nick Saban, or I believe it's him and Nick Saban are the two, over the last decade or so. But they still are Notre Dame. And I do think that they do draw enough talent and they have a good enough coaching staff and a good enough athletic department that they can get to number 1. I don't think it's this year. However, I wouldn't completely count them out necessarily. Number 7, Florida, we got in these rankings. What do you guys think about Florida? Obviously, that LSU loss, Kyle Trask really struggled in the rain. Bad interception down the road. And then Joe Burrow with a long touchdown pass to Jamar Chase pretty much ended that one. However, Florida's defensive line is legit. They can get after the quarterback. They have one of the better defenses in the entire country. There's no denying that. It's just Kyle Trask is not Felipe Franks.
I mean, I like Trask in terms of a thrower. actually more than Felipe Franks.
Really?
What I don't like, yeah, I think he makes better decisions. He's a little more decisive than Franks.
He's definitely more consistent.
He doesn't have the talent that Franks does.
I think Franks has the ability to go and win you a football game. I think Franks could have won that LSU football game. He did it last year, whereas Kyle Trask can't lift you over the line and carry a team. It's just, like you said, Felipe Franks' decision-making at times is questionable. He'll win you crazy games, but he'll also lose you.
Yeah, and Franks has lost games for Florida like he's won them.
Mm-hmm.
Franks has performed extremely well, and he's performed
very poorly.
Very subpar. So what Trask is going to give you is a little more consistency. But like Dan Mullen likes to talk about his young quarterback, he's just doing too much sometimes. Trask seems to go out every drive thinking, man, I need to win this game for us. And sometimes that's not what you need. You need to rely on your top-rate defense that Florida possesses. And so going into that Georgia game, you're going to have two quarterbacks that have the talent capable to win football games, but it's all going to come down to who manages that game the best. Right now, I give Jake Fromm the edge if I'm just sitting here right now. But again, they got a good defense on that Florida side. Got a scare against South Carolina, but this is the best Florida's looked in quite some time, especially under Dan Mullen.
It's just crazy, it's interesting to think of how good this team could have been had Felipe Franks not gone down.
Yeah.
Because this team could be, pushing for that top four with Felipe Franks, like you said. And the thing that's been most disappointing, I think, for Florida has been LaMichael Pirine for me. I expected him to be one of the leaders for that Florida team, and so far this season, he's averaging 4.6 yards per carry, but especially at the beginning of the season, he was struggling. He's only got 460 yards on the year. So I would like to see a little bit more out of him. Amari Jones, redshirt freshman, very, very talented, highly recruited guy out of Florida. He's been getting a little bit of playtime recently. I like it a lot because it gives that offense a little bit more of a change of pace. And Dan Mullen has said he is not afraid to let him throw the football. And he threw a touchdown pass last week. But yeah, it's just, I don't know if they can get over the hump without Felipe Franks. That's what it comes down to.
Tyler, what do you think?
Yeah, like you said, like you touched on, the whole Kyle Trask and Amari Jones, I think it's a cool aspect and a cool dynamic that Mullen's putting into this offense. He's relying on Trask for most of the games, but then he'll throw in this redshirt freshman, this mobile quarterback who's able to extend plays and move the pocket, and he's able to make things happen with his legs. And I think he's a talented guy, but Florida's offensive line needs to play better down the stretch.
Absolutely.
And they've allowed 16 sacks this year. And going along with that, Kyle Trask needs to be better under pressure. In the LSU game, we saw that game came down to the interception in the end zone, against LSU. So I think if Florida were to want to make a push to get higher, Trask needs to play better, and he needs to do it now, and he needs to step up big in their game against Georgia in a couple weeks. But like you said, definitely this team would be a top 4 team right now. They still had Felipe Franks.
Moving on to another team who is actually undefeated, the Penn State Nittany Lions. They've been good. However, I don't know if they've been great. It seems like they've kind of just been put into this number 6 spot based on everybody else just kind of losing or not, getting upset and stuff like that, and Penn State getting the job done. However, I haven't been completely convinced yet. The Michigan came back at the last second. They should have lost to Pitt earlier in the year.
Yep.
Clifford has looked better in recent weeks. However, he's not Trace McSorley. They don't have a Saquon Barkley. So I think this is a good Penn State team. Do I think they're going to make it a run at the college football playoff? Absolutely not.
I'll say this. There's a reason we have them as the last of the unbeatens. And I think it's a pretty severe gap between our top 5 and Penn State.
Oh, it's miles.
Yeah. And so Penn State, it would concern me if they played Michigan and Pitt on the road and played tight games and won. It's alarming to me that they played at home and had to scrap for wins. They're going to play in Columbus this year. And that was a game for the ages 2 years ago with Barkley and JT Barrett. I'm just hoping it's a competitive game this time around. I mean, Ohio State looks like a machine. Penn State, they just don't have the athletes on the field like they did.
They have a defense that's really good.
Yeah.
However, offensively, they're just not the same football team.
I mean, offensively, what are they without KJ Hamler? I mean, that's your Steph Curry on offense. He's the guy that can space the field. Because outside of that, you have running backs by committee, Sean Clifford, and you don't have tight ends like Mike Gesicki. You don't have receivers like Chris Godwin anymore. Mm-hmm. You don't have these guys that I don't know how Penn State got those guys in the first place, but James Franklin, he's a much better coach when he has athletes. And right now, all he's got is KJ Hamler.
Yeah, no, definitely. I like what you said earlier about the running back by committee. They haven't really found a true running back to throw in there and carry the workload. Sean Clifford, he's played well this year. Their defense has definitely been their strong suit. They have the fourth best rushing defense in the league, or in the nation. I think that's definitely been their identity all season long. But going forward, I don't know if that's going to bid well for them against Ohio State. You can't rely on steady defensive play and not a whole lot of offense working for you against an Ohio State. So if they really want to make a jump to get to the playoffs, they need to establish an offensive identity.
Now, moving on to the top 5, this is where a lot of controversy kind of steps in. I want you guys real quick to read your guys' top 5, and then we'll get in. We've already said the shows one. I'll read off the shows one more time before we read off our own. 5 Oklahoma, 4 Clemson, 3 Alabama, 2 Ohio State, and number 1 LSU. Jack, what do you got?
Not that. I got Clemson at number 5, outside the playoff looking in. Oklahoma at number 4. Alabama at number 3. LSU at number 2. Ohio State is the number 1 team in the country, in my opinion, at the present time. Tyler?
At number 5, I have Oklahoma. 4, I have Alabama. 3, Ohio State. 2, still Clemson. And 1, LSU.
I agree with you, the number 1 team in the country. The LSU Tigers have been absolutely phenomenal this season. I absolutely love Coach Orgeron, Joe Burrow leading the Heisman campaign. In my opinion, number 5, I had Clemson. They haven't been good enough this season. They've beaten everybody, but they just haven't quite clicked yet. I do think they can click, and I do think they will get into the playoff eventually. But right now, I think they're on the outside looking in. At number 4, Oklahoma. Number 3, Ohio State. And number 2, Alabama. And of course, at number 1, I had LSU. The biggest talking point I think we have to talk about right now is Tua Tagovailoa's injury.
Yeah.
That is alarming. It's an ankle injury again. He injured his ankle last year. Durability is easily and clearly a problem for Tua. And without Tua, this Alabama team, that LSU game is really looking scary with that one coming in a couple weeks. It is looking scary, 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 especially with Tua Tagovailoa. It's not certain when he's going to return.
Yeah, they're not certain. At first, they feared it was an ankle fracture, which would have kept him out at least until the Auburn game, probably for the season. Now it's a high ankle sprain, so we don't know when he's going to be back. One thing is for certain, though. When you sprain your ankle, the timetable, it's like an Achilles injury, Chaz. It's something where it could be a week and you're fine, a day and you're fine, or it could nag you for a year. I mean, it really is. It's a case-by-case basis. The one thing that alarms me about this ankle, it's the same one, and it's almost the same injury.
Yeah.
And it noticeably slowed Tua last year.
Oh, absolutely. It was night and day. We saw Tua, the guy that was leading the Heisman race, throwing 40 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, versus a guy that threw 4 interceptions in his final 2 games of the year.
Yeah.
Or final 3 games of the year, excuse me. It's scary. As someone that's had an ankle injury similar to what Tua's gone through, when you play on it, it is painful. Like, every step you take is painful. While you might not be doing more structural damage because it's not a fracture, there's no getting around the fact that every single time you take a step, you need a wince.
Yeah, and you feel it.
Exactly. And if that distracts you for the slightest second, for an absolute millisecond, that can make the difference against a team like LSU with defensive players like Grant Delpit, who's going to be a top 5 pick in next year's draft. It can really, really harm Alabama's title chances this year.
You know, it's not the distraction that harms quarterbacks. It's the knowledge that I know I can't get out of the pocket anymore. And when you limit Tua Tagovailoa to just a pocket passer, and this not just in college, like if you're an NFL scout, this should be alarming. That since he can't get outside the pocket, he's fairly pedestrian when he's just standing back there against elite defenses. And in my opinion, LSU, while their defense isn't amazing, it's going to be the best that Alabama's faced all year.
Yeah, this injury to Tagovailoa it's a huge blow to Alabama. It's the main reason why I have dropped them down to 4. You just don't, like you said, you just don't know when it comes to an ankle injury. These things can last for weeks, they can last for months, they can last for a day. Especially with a quarterback like Tagovailoa, who he relies on being able to extend plays and get out of the pocket. But if you contain him in the pocket and you just have him stationary, you have him stand still, you turn him into a pocket passer, he has a good arm. But do I think that he can lead them to a national championship as a pocket passer? No. So that's why this ankle injury is such a big deal. It's such a huge blow to Alabama.
Mac Jones will be getting the start this weekend against Arkansas, former 3-star recruit. The one thing for him that he's definitely has going for him is the guys he's got around him. There's no denying that aside from the quarterback position on offense, they are loaded. Najee Harris, one of the most talented running backs in the country, former 5-star. And those wide receivers, they go 3 deep.
Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Smith,
Henry Ruggs. They are loaded. So he definitely has all of the weapons in the arsenal that he needs to go out there and beat Arkansas. I think he will do it. Let's talk about LSU Ohio State. And then we'll get into our predictions for the upcoming games this weekend. For me, LSU's the best team. Jack, you said Ohio State. Let's hear why.
So I'm going to take Ohio State just because, you know, Ohio State to me is year in, year out the most talented team on offense. They have playmakers. I mean, I hate to say it, but they do. I mean, J.K. Dobbins, guy's a dude. They have receivers that can spread the field. They have a quarterback that is the best quarterback they've had since, I mean, I hesitate to say J.T. Barrett because I think Justin Fields is better than J.T. Barrett. I'm talking about Braxton Miller, Terrell Pryor level of good right now.
I think that they haven't had a quarterback that's as much of a game changer since Terrell Pryor.
Yeah.
In terms of with his arm and his legs. Because J.T. Barrett, yes, he was a very good leader and stuff and a very good college quarterback. Justin Fields has an X factor that J.T. Barrett just didn't have.
And that's why Ohio State was a strong offensive team last year. Their issue was their defense. Well, now you have a defense led by Chase Young, who, in my opinion, is going to be a future number 1 pick. I mean, Chase Young, you look at some of the defensive ends that have come through Ohio State in recent years, Joey Bosa, Nick Bosa. Chase Young has the potential to be better than both of those guys. That's alarming for opposing offenses. And when they go into this Wisconsin game, Ohio State, they all of a sudden from last year where they were getting gashed repeatedly in their secondary, they have 3 guys that can cover man-to-man pretty consistently, Tyler. And I know this because you're an Ohio State fan. I mean, you can speak to just how good this Ohio State defense has been. I mean, why have they been able to turn it around this year?
I'll give you one key name that has turned around big time for Ohio State, and it's Jeffrey Okudah. 5-star safety a couple of years ago, coming out of high school. Didn't have the greatest first 2 years, didn't have an interception all last year. This year has 3 already. He's been an absolute nightmare for quarterbacks. And, you know, like you said, Chase Young, terrorizing quarterbacks, leading the top 5 in the nation in sacks. And, you go to the other side of the football, Justin Fields, KJ Hill, Benjamin Victor, all these wide receivers that Justin Fields is throwing the ball to, they're all speedy guys. They blow the top off the defense. And then you have J.K. Dobbins rushing the ball. And, I do get it. They're a great football team. But I wouldn't say that they're better than LSU yet.
You know, when you were saying about nightmares and Jeffrey Okuda, kind of reminded me how a couple guys in my fraternity house last night were watching the Harry Potter movie, the third one, with like what was it? What's the thing called? Where like it shows your greatest fear and you got to do the thing that like the Patronus, right?
And the ridiculous.
Yeah, the ridiculous. That's it. The ridiculous one. Adrian Martinez probably sees Jeffrey Okuda.
Yeah.
Like I don't know why that image just popped in my brain.
It's not a clown. It's not a Dementor.
No, it's Jeffrey Okuda. It's just an Ohio State defensive back.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's the part of the scene they cut out.
There's no denying that this Ohio State team is an absolute machine. They've just been rolling through everybody. With that being said, I think LSU's been better. I think LSU's been the best team by a country mile so far this season. They have the best win. Actually, I think they have the two best wins so far this year over Texas and Florida. In terms of the way they played, in terms especially offensively. Joe Burrow has been the best player in the entire country so far this season. Right now, he's got 2,484 passing yards, 29 touchdowns compared to 3 interceptions. He's only been sacked 12 times. They have a running game this year with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's got over 500 yards rushing. Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson create an absolute matchup nightmare for anyone that wants to go man-to-man and rush against Joe Burrow. This LSU team, compared to previous years, it's almost like it's flipped. Their defense is good, and they got a couple studs. However, offensively, now with the implementation of the spread offense, it's taken this team to new heights, and they can beat Alabama. And it's getting to the point where I'm starting to think that they will beat Alabama, especially with Tua's injury.
Yeah.
It's getting to the point where I think that LSU, for me, has to be the playoff frontrunner in the SEC. The way they've played this season, it doesn't seem like they're slowing down. Joe Burrow is legit. We've seen so much growth. I can't remember a player that's grown so much from year one as a starter to year two.
Yeah. So, you know, with all the talk about Alabama and Clemson year 5 coming into the season, it's so refreshing to have two teams be the title favorites at the present time, like LSU and Ohio State. And look, as much as I don't want Ohio State to make the college national championship game, it's Tyler smiling over there. I'm sure he's enjoying that. But what a storyline, Chaz. I mean, you have Joe Burrow against his former team, the Ohio State Buckeyes. That's an intriguing national title. I mean, on the flip side, you have, oh my God, it's Dabo versus Nick Saban for the 5th time in a row. Or you could get Joe Burrow versus the team that pushed him out the door in Ohio State. And so, in my opinion right now, it's great to have LSU and Ohio State at 1 and 2. I hope they get to play.
Yeah, I can't wait. We're going to get into some predictions for the upcoming weekend. Lots and lots of good football games coming up. We're going to start with the 9 a.m. game, the big noon kickoff for most people across the country. Ohio State, Wisconsin. Tyler, what do you think?
This is going to be a good game. I think Wisconsin has prepared themselves for this game well. I think Ohio State has prepared themselves for this game well. I think Ohio State is eventually going to come out victorious of this game strictly because their defense is going to force Wisconsin to make mistakes. It's what they've done all season long. They're going to suffocate the offense, and that's what they do. That's their name of the game. Suffocate the offense. They don't allow them to score. They don't allow many yards. Don't allow points. And on the offensive side of the football, Justin Fields, J.K. Dobbins, Benjamin Victor, K.J. Hill, Chris Olave, you can't cover them all. You can pick however many, you just can't cover them all. So I think Ohio State comes out on top because defense is just going to strangle whoever Wisconsin throws at them, whether it's Jonathan Taylor or anyone else that they want to throw at them. Ohio State's going to swarm. Ohio State wins.
Yeah, Ohio State's going to win. The real question is, can Jonathan Taylor break 100 yards? Because I don't know if Ohio State has any reason to fear Jack Cohn as a quarterback. And they're basically, I already know their defensive strategy. It's, all right, Jack Cohn, beat us. If Jack Cohn beats Ohio State, more power to the Wisconsin Badgers. But, I mean, there is no way hell will freeze over before they allow Jonathan Taylor to run wild on them. They're going to bring 9 guys in the box.
Oh, absolutely. They're going to stack the box, and they're basically going to play isolation coverage on the outside. And with guys like Jeffrey Okudah in their secondary, I don't even know if the Wisconsin wide receivers and tight ends can create enough space and, get open enough for Jack Cohn to be able to find them. Jack Cohn's not going to go and win you a football game, and I don't see it being any different. I think Wisconsin's defense can keep them in the game for 3 quarters, but I think in the end, I think Vegas got it right with their 14.5 spread. I think Ohio State's going to pull away in the 4th quarter and progress to 8-0. Moving on to the next game, LSU Auburn. In my opinion, the biggest game of the year, or not the biggest game of the year, the biggest game of the weekend, maybe the biggest game of the year up to this point. I think LSU's ready for this. I think Joe Burrow's going to keep rolling. I think LSU wins, and I think they win. I think they beat the spread. I think they win by 2 touchdowns.
This is another test for Joe Burrow and another potential for a Heisman moment. It comes at home in Death Valley. Give me Burrow and the Tigers. They're going to keep rolling. It's just going to be tough. It's like I said, Chaz, Bo Nix. I mean, I like Bo Nix. Give Bo Nix 2 years when they return to Death Valley in 2021. Maybe he pulls off the upset then. Not this year.
Yeah, definitely. I give this game to LSU. Bo Nix going into Death Valley, he's going to be seeing ghosts. You have that many fans screaming their faces off, like you said earlier, at you as a 19-year-old true freshman. Joe Burrow, in this game, he's going to shine bright. I don't think you can bet against LSU in this one.
One thing to note, the forecast is rain. We'll see how that affects the passing game. However, with quarterbacks of that talent and that arm strength, I don't think it will affect them too much. Moving on to our next one. I know you got a lot of heart in this one. Jack, how do you think your Wolverines are going to do against the Fighting Irish?
Okay, well, if you're a fan of statistics, Jim Harbaugh has never won a game at Michigan as the underdog. And Vegas said, all right, Jim, we're going to give you a fighting chance here. And if you notice, Chaz, what's the line for the game?
They're favored by 1 point.
They're favored, which is why I'm taking Michigan. How? I don't know how. I don't know how. They were actually favored by 4 at the start of the week. The spread now is just 1, so it's obviously been knocked down. I don't know what it'll be at game time. It may be knocked down to even. But Michigan is the favorite. It's tough to win under the lights in Ann Arbor. Michigan and Notre Dame, they stack up well, and it all comes down to this. Michigan, in my opinion, is a national championship caliber team. Talent-wise. On the field, they have three wide receivers that, in my opinion, if you put them on Alabama's rosters, are insane. Donovan Peoples-Jones, Nico Collins, in my opinion, is the best Michigan wide receiver since Braylon Edwards. And Tariq Black, Ronnie Bell, who had a tough drop at Penn State last weekend, but Ronnie Bell has been balling out all year long.
Slot receiver, yep.
It all comes down to Shea Patterson. Is he going to sling the rock, or is he going to play hesitant? Is he going to be able to hold on to the football? And can Michigan just establish themselves in the first quarter? I mean, don't give up 21 points. It's not that difficult. And they gave up 35 to Wisconsin before they went to the locker rooms at halftime. So if they can keep Notre Dame at least, fine. If they get to the red zone, that's fine, guys. But kick a field goal or something. If they had forced Penn State to kick a field goal 1 time, 2 times in that game, Michigan wins. But it just seems like Michigan doesn't play a bend but don't break style. They're very fragile.
And they don't come out of the gates firing.
They don't. They don't. And it's a preparation issue and it's a coaching issue, Chaz. It is absolutely a coaching issue. When you call a timeout before the first play of the game, I mean, what is the explanation?
We talked about it earlier.
What is the explanation?
We talked about that earlier. Your first 10 plays are almost every single time, 99% of the time, they are scripted. They are scripted. Like, you know exactly what you're going to do. All right, we're going to run a zone read to the right side. If they, let's say the defense flips something, we'll audible to this play, right? We're going to run a play action rollout, get Shea Patterson moving. We're going to run, maybe a spot corner. Try and hit Nico Collins on a corner route or something like that. But when you can't even execute the first play that you practiced all week, Like, you literally, like, I don't think people understand, like, who haven't,
Play.
you practice, the first 10 plays, they're scripted, yes, but you practice each of them extensively and walk through them more so than any other play all week. Like, in your walkthroughs prior to the game, the plays you walk through are usually the plays that you start with.
Yeah.
And it's horrifying.
Tyler, got any thoughts? From the other side?
From the other side of this, I like Notre Dame in this game. I think Ian Book is going to get out to a hot start. I think they're going to, as we've already said time and time again, Michigan has failed to score in the first quarter. They failed to get out to a good start. They just look sluggish. They're slow. They're not able to establish anything in the first quarter and a half, first half even. And I think, if you do that against a Notre Dame team like this, again, I'm not fully sold on Notre Dame this year, but I think Ian Book is a good enough quarterback that he's going to put up enough points where Michigan's not going to be able to come back from.
With that said, I take Michigan 21-17.
Wow. I'm going to go a completely different way. I think Notre Dame wins, and I think they win by 2 touchdowns.
Wow.
I think Notre Dame, I've lost all faith in that Michigan team. I've lost faith in Jim Harbaugh. Well, I do think he's a good coach. I don't see it with this team. Josh Gaddis as a play caller just isn't doing it for me. I think this Notre Dame defense is going to get to them. I think they're going to collapse them in the rain as well. I think that Michigan's going to try and run the football, and it's not going to work, and they're going to fall behind. And I just don't think they'll be able to close the gap. I think
Not a very good team behind.
that's exactly what I'm saying. I think Shea Patterson will actually play better in this game than he has in previous weeks. But being that the way Michigan plays and the way I'm expecting Josh Gaddis to come out, I think that they're going to fall behind, and I don't think they're going to be able to close the gap. And I'm taking my mother's alma mater, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish.
Over my mother's fighting alma mater, the Michigan Wolverines.
Yeah, it's going to be a great weekend. This is probably the first weekend, maybe the second weekend, that we've had 3 games where you can go 9 a.m., 12, 7, or 12, 4.
Get up for
7.
game day this week.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In my fraternity house, we got a movement. It's called Make Saturdays Great Again. We start at 9 a.m., we end at 4. We just watch football all day. We got pizza. This time we got pancakes because of the 9 a.m. game. I am excited. I can't wait for this weekend. Let's see if the ASU Sun Devils can bounce back, get a win on the road at UCLA. Whew. Buckle up, everybody. It's going to be a wild ride this weekend. For Chaz Messman,
Jack Johnson.
Tyler Culross.
This was the Playoff Committee. I will see you guys next week. Peace!